The subcommittee on water and power will come to order. The purpose of today's hearing is to examine the status and management of drought in the western United States. Approximately 90% of the western U.S. is currently experiencing some degree of moderate to severe drought. Water has always been a limited resource in the West. We've got this old saying in Arizona that whiskey is for drinking and water is for fighting. By the turn of the 19th century, as westward expansion took hold, a complex framework of case law and interstate water compacts allocated and in some cases over-allocated surface water supplies. Congress later established the Bureau of Reclamation to reclaim and maximize surface water in the West. Today, however, abnormally dry conditions are reducing the availability of water for farms, for industry, and for our cities and towns. Native fish and wildlife have never been so imperiled, and drought is making our forests more susceptible to wildfire. Behind me, we have a graphic produced by the U.S. Drought Monitor Program. Updated weekly, it shows the general reach of a regional drought that has persisted for the last 20 years. And you can see how bad it is in the West. Some climate scientists call this a mega drought. Tree ring and soil data indicates that we are experiencing the worst drought in 1,200 years, having surpassed the last longest drought, which occurred in the late 1500s. Scientific assessments show that these drought conditions are made worse by the effects of climate change, rising temperatures, and reduced snowmelt. This issue is a priority for me because Arizona is on the front lines of this mega drought. In August, the Department of the Interior announced its first ever drought restrictions on the Colorado River. It affects 40 million Americans in 7 states: Arizona, California, Nevada, Colorado, Utah, New Mexico, and Wyoming. But Arizona gets hit the hardest. We stand to lose 18% of our annual Colorado River water allocation beginning next year. That's in a few months. Now, fortunately, Arizona is prepared for these initial cutbacks. We are implementing mitigation measures that keep more water in the Colorado River system and improve water efficiency in our farming. We plan to save enough water so that most Arizonans will not be impacted. But, we're not out of the woods here. Last month, the Interior Department produced a new forecast showing that water levels in Lake Mead could soon decline lower and lower enough to trigger a second round of drought restrictions. Lake Mead is the nation's largest man-made lake or reservoir. It stores Colorado River water behind the Hoover Dam, the world's largest public infrastructure project when it was built during the Great Depression. Currently, Lake Mead's capacity is 35%. It's the lowest level since the lake was first filled. Its sister reservoir, Lake Powell, is the second largest man-made lake in the United States, and it's not at 35% capacity, but it's at 30% capacity. Lake Mead and Lake Powell are the poster children for western drought. A pale bathtub ring encircles both lakes where the canyon walls were once submerged. We have that here. You can see what the level was historically by that ring and what it is today. It's significantly lower. It goes from about 1299 at full capacity, and it's about 1,067 or so feet above sea level today. At Lake Powell, only 2 of its boat ramps can still safely unload motorized boats. And if the Rockies see another year or two of record low snowmelt, where the headwaters of the Colorado River are located, Arizona, California, and Nevada will be facing tougher drought restrictions, possibly beginning in 2023. And then there's hydropower, a source of carbon-free energy that is vital to grid reliability and resiliency in the West. Reclamation predicts there's a chance next year that water levels in Lake Powell might dip low enough that power generation at Glen Canyon Dam could be affected, and in some cases affected significantly. Many other watersheds across the West are facing similar water scarcity and sustainability challenges. These challenges may sound serious because they are serious. But here's the thing, there is no country in the world that is better at solving big problems when we put our minds to it. We can solve this today, and that's why we're here. We're going to hear from a panel of experts in government, in environmental advocacy, in agriculture, who are working on water management solutions to these very issues. And I look forward to listening to their testimony. And with that, I'll turn this over now to Ranking Member Hyde-Smith for her opening remarks.
I'd like to thank the chair for calling this important meeting today to bring attention to this crippling issue that is plaguing the West. And thanks to our witnesses that are here for your willingness to come and serve and offer your suggestions. And I hope your testimony and answers today will leave us with a more unified understanding of how serious drought and drought-related issues are, and more importantly, potential solutions to water supply challenges in drought-prone areas. Lying east of the Mississippi River, my state does not have as many drought-related issues as western states. In fact, we tend to run into trouble on the opposite end of that spectrum with heavy rainfall and catastrophic flooding. However, a commonality I find between severe drought and flooding is the devastating impact that it has on our farmers, ranchers, and our rural communities. Farmers are the lifeblood of this nation, and reclamation is integral to farmers as it provides 1 out of 5 Western farmers with irrigation water for 10 million acres of farmland, which provides 60% of the nation's vegetables and 25% of its fruits and nuts. I believe it's vital we discover responsible solutions to address Western water infrastructure needs for our farmers, ranchers, and the rural communities. I look forward to discussing how to ease the harmful economic impacts of drought in a manner that allows for the completion of economic development projects that will benefit our farmers and rural communities, protect watershed health, and support those rural communities that need access to water storage the most. So thank you for being here. Thank you for being a part of this American process, and I sure hope to learn something from you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ranking Member Hyde-Smith. Now it's time to introduce our witnesses. First, we have Ms. Tanya Trujillo, the Assistant Secretary for Water and Science at the Department of the Interior, who is testifying in person. And next we have Tom Bushatsky, the Director of the Arizona Department of Water Resources, who is also testifying in person. Participating virtually, we have Ms. Julie Schaff-Ellingson, the Executive Vice President of the North Dakota Stockmen's Association. And finally, we have Ms. Jennifer Pitt, the Colorado River Program Director for the National Audubon Society, who is also participating virtually. I want to thank all of our witnesses for testifying today, especially our Arizona witness, Mr. Bushatsky. Your written remarks, all of you, will be included in the hearing record, and please keep your oral testimony to 5 minutes each. Assistant Secretary Trujillo, we will begin with you.
Thank you, Senator Kelly. Good afternoon. Senator Kelly, I appreciate your leadership on these issues and your service here today with this hearing. Senator Hyde-Smith, equally, thank you for chairing the subcommittee and for being part of our Western water world today. Appreciate your service. I am Assistant Secretary for Water and Science at the Department of the Interior, Tanya Trujillo. Thank you for the opportunity to testify regarding the status and management of drought in the western U.S. Along with my fellow panelists, we will present a thorough picture of how climate change and the drought are affecting our communities and our environment. I was last before the committee in June to testify in support of the bipartisan infrastructure deal, which contains many provisions that will help assist us with these efforts. The entire West has experienced severe drought conditions this year, and in some cases, we are seeing events we have never seen before. So we are having to adapt and react in real time and to work very closely with our partners to respond to the situations as they are evolving. October 1st marked the new water year across the West. And unfortunately, we are starting out with water supply conditions in many basins that are significantly below average. For example, in the Colorado River Basin, Lake Powell and Lake Mead are currently at historic lows. And in California, where we have just seen the driest 2 years back-to-back on record, some of the reservoirs are also at their historic low levels. It will be essential to maintain the close coordination with our partners on the ground as we move forward if we do continue to see continued dry and warm conditions that are predicted. The Department of the Interior is working closely with our sister agencies and with the states, tribes, and local entities to respond to the drought. Since January, we have provided funding to over 220 different projects around the West, and we were recently able to reprogram $100 million to be able to be responsive to drought conditions that are evolving in various programs and various contexts. Those contributions will include making infrastructure improvements and otherwise improving and continuing to maintain our drought contingency planning efforts. We also received additional funding through the disaster relief bill that was passed last week, and we are looking forward to working to get that funding out to the local and tribal communities as soon as possible. We have worked to develop coordinated operational plans in many areas, and those will help us to respond to the drought conditions as well. For example, in the Colorado River Basin, we are currently implementing the provisions of prior agreements, and in particular the 2007 interim guidelines for coordinated operation of the reservoirs and the more recent drought contingency plans. We were unfortunately in the position of announcing the first level of shortage, the first tier of shortage in the Colorado River Basin in August, and it will take efforts to continue to develop the next level of agreements that are going to be necessary in that basin. But we have a proven track record. The Colorado River Basin can be a model for the type of collaboration that we need in other areas as well, and it will be essential to maintain that collaboration for our collective successes. It is great to be here today with colleagues from Arizona and Colorado and North Dakota as we work together among the federal family and our non-federal partners and with members of Congress to address these issues. Across the West, Interior has continued to utilize the best available science to improve our water supply projections, and those can help us inform our decision-making process and work, again, collaboratively with our partners. We support the continued investments and improvements to help maintain our important infrastructure projects. We support investments in new technologies such as water recycling and desalination efforts, and of course, continued collaboration on how to best ensure that our communities can utilize the federal resources that we have available. We appreciate Congress's attention to the severity of the drought conditions we are seeing in the West and welcome your input as to the new tools and approaches that we can use to help our communities. I look forward to our continued work together, and again, with our partners, we will be able to address the ongoing challenges. I would be happy to answer any follow-up questions. Thank you again for your attention on this important issue.
Thank you, Ms. Trujillo. And Mr. Bushatsky, please proceed with your testimony.
Thank you, Senator Kelly. Good afternoon, Chairman Kelly, Ranking Member Hyde-Smith, and members of the subcommittee. I am Tom Bushatsky, Director of the Arizona Department of Water Resources. Thank you for providing me an opportunity to testify on behalf of the state of Arizona. I have submitted written testimony for the record, and my comments today will highlight key elements of that testimony. A 20-year drought and climate change have had devastating impacts on the flow of the Colorado River and on the contents of Lakes Mead and Powell. A declared shortage in 2022 will result in Arizona losing 512,000 acre-feet of water, or 18% of its total Colorado River entitlement. Impacts to agriculture, tribes, and municipal water users will result. An intense 8-month effort resulted in Arizonans coming together to provide financial resources and wet water to partially mitigate those impacts. In 2023, projections of Lake Mead elevations are barely above the trigger for an additional 80,000 acre-feet of cuts to Arizona. Those cuts would primarily impact tribes and municipal water users in my state. However, it is unlikely that mitigation resources will be available to address those additional cuts. While the 2007 guidelines and the Drought Contingency Plan have slowed the decline of Lake Mead, those prescriptions are clearly not enough. The likelihood of deeper cuts in the future is high. The amount of water in Lake Powell is also decreasing, and the probability of the lake reaching critical elevations is increasing. Risks include potential reductions of hydropower and increased costs to tribes, irrigation districts, and others in Arizona. In August, projections of Lake Mead levels for 2023 triggered a consultation provision pursuant to the Drought Contingency Plan in the lower basin. Arizona, Nevada, and California have been meeting pursuant to the consultation provision that targets protecting Lake Mead from falling below elevation 1020. That will be a daunting challenge. Additional actions to protect Lake Mead fall into two categories. First, mandatory cuts, or second, additional conservation. Arizona is working towards achieving additional conservation instead of greater mandatory cuts, but that will be a heavy lift. Success is dependent upon voluntary efforts among tribal and non-tribal water users within the state and compiling the resources to make it happen. As we move forward, the 2007 operating guidelines and the Drought Contingency Plan have taught us how to be successful in the consultation process and in managing the river long term. Those lessons learned include: 1, be vigilant in monitoring the hydrology and projected reservoir elevations. To do so, we must have data and modeling products produced by the Bureau of Reclamation, who possess the best available science. 2, achieve outcomes that result in an equitable sharing of the benefits and risks attendant to the Colorado River system. 3, adhere to an ethic of collaboration among the states, Mexico, the United States, tribes, and other stakeholders in the basin. 4, recognize that we are connected from Wyoming to the Sea of Cortez in Mexico. 5, incentivize actions that conserve water in Lake Mead. 6, resources for the United States and its agencies must be tools in the toolbox. And 7, continue state participation in formal discussions regarding the implementation of the 1944 Mexico Water Treaty. While we focus on enhancing the sustainability of the Colorado River system, we should not lose sight of other mechanisms to minimize or mitigate the impacts of climate change and drought. Maximizing the use of reclaimed or recycled water, improving and expanding existing infrastructure to increase reservoir yield and to move water, and augmenting water supplies through desalination enhanced aquifer recharge, and improved watershed health through more effective forest management are all tools that need to be deployed. In conclusion, drought and climate change are presenting challenges that are likely to increase over time. Proper planning, management, robust conservation, and collaboration across political jurisdictions and amongst stakeholders create the greatest likelihood for success today and into the future. Thank you, and be willing to answer questions as well.
Thank you, Mr. Bushatsky. And we'll now go to Ms. Pitt for her opening testimony, and then to Ms. Ellingson. So, Ms. Pitt.
Chairman Kelly, Ranking Member Hyde-Smith, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for holding this important hearing on drought in the West. It really is an honor to testify before you today. My name is Jennifer Pitt. I'm the Colorado River Program Director for the National Audubon Society. Others have said it, but I need to say it again. Climate change has come barging through the front doors of the Colorado River Basin. The Colorado River has lost 20% of its historic flows in the past 20 years, and scientists are forecasting another 9% loss with every degree of warming. We need to act quickly to avoid a catastrophic water supply crisis, and we also need long-term solutions because as temperatures continue to increase, the Colorado River's water supply will keep shrinking. There's so much at stake. The Colorado River provides drinking water to 40 million people. It's the lifeblood for 30 federally recognized tribes. It's the silent utility underpinning a $1 trillion economy. If you eat a salad in January, pretty much anywhere in this country, your lettuce was grown with it. The basin's rivers are beloved, supporting recreation businesses in rural counties. These rivers are the region's lifeblood, habitats that support birds, fish, and other wildlife. People value the Colorado River in so many ways, not least for what it means to us culturally and spiritually. Stand on the river's edge, and you really are reminded what it means to be grateful. In passing the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, you have set the stage for important investments to address the impacts of drought and climate change, but more is needed. I'll discuss a few and refer you to my written testimony for others. Emergency drought relief funding is needed to respond to the historic drought conditions affecting tens of millions of Americans. Federal investment in USGS monitoring and science, including OpenET, is needed so we have data that allows us to understand these unprecedented changes. Reclamation's binational program needs additional funding, operating under Minute 323 to the 1944 Colorado River Treaty with Mexico. This program is conserving water in Lake Mead and improving downstream riparian habitats. Investments could help mitigate the environmental and public health crises caused by the receding shoreline at California's Salton Sea and other saline lakes across the West. And funds are also badly needed to support Colorado River Basin tribes, particularly those with households lacking indoor water service who suffered greatly from COVID-19. Funds are also needed for tribal water settlements to allow tribes to benefit from their water rights and to reduce the uncertainty that unsettled rights imposes on all Colorado River water users. Finally, I want to address Colorado River management. Reclamation plays important roles as a convener, guardian of a process that needs to be transparent and inclusive, carrying out the federal trust responsibility with tribes, and as a science provider. Federal leadership must continue emphasizing commitment to collaboration and promoting the creative thinking that has characterized the basin. This is a sobering and scary time for everyone and everything that depends on the Colorado River. As Congress considers priorities and funding opportunities, Audubon supports increasing federal investments and leadership for the Colorado River Basin and across the West to ensure federal agencies receive critically needed resources to build a more resilient system and mitigate the effects of climate change. Congress has several pending bills with bipartisan support that respond to the many needs of tribal communities and Western states' water supply needs that we support. It is imperative our communities have the resources they need to prepare for and respond to the drought and climate crises that touch every living thing. Thank you so much for the opportunity to testify today, and of course, I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Ms. Pitt. I'll now recognize Senator Hoeven to introduce Ms. Ellingson.
Thank you, Chairman Kelly, and also Ranking Member Hyde-Smith. Appreciate it very much. Appreciate you holding this hearing today, and I want to thank Julie Ellingson for joining us virtually. She is the Executive Vice President of the North Dakota Stockmen's Association, and in addition to doing an incredible job administering the Stockmen's Association, she and her husband have a cattle ranch south of Bismarck as well. I think they raise registered Angus, but I never asked her for sure, but I'm guessing that's right. But she comes to the job as far as the Stockmans, you know, as somebody who grew up farming and ranching, and so she truly understands it from the ground up and has made it her livelihood. She lives it. She doesn't just advocate for our cowboys. She has lived it her whole life. Worked with her on farm bills and worked with her on disaster assistance for our producers. Most recently, we secured $10 billion for farmers and ranchers, specifically $750 million of that for our ranchers, and that's nationwide. But now we have to work with USDA to put that out there through the WIP Plus program on the farm side, and on the rancher side, we really have to figure out the parameters. And so I certainly look forward to working with her on that issue because we've just had incredible drought in our state, one of the toughest droughts I can ever remember. We've had drought throughout the West, and so this hearing on water is extremely important for all those farmers and ranchers, and particularly the ranchers that are out there trying to keep their herd and not shorten that herd more than they have to, particularly for our young ranchers. And so today's hearing is important because it's about making sure that we have water available throughout the West for our farmers and for our ranchers so that they can do what they do better than anyone else in the world, and that is provide the highest quality, lowest cost food supply that every single American benefits from every single day. And so with that, I would sure like to again thank the chairman and ranking member for holding this hearing, and appreciate this opportunity to introduce and welcome Julie Ellingson and her testimony today. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Hoeven, and good afternoon, Chairman Kelly, Ranking Member Hyde-Smith, and members of the subcommittee. As the Senator said, my name is Julie Ellingson, and I'm a fourth-generation beef producer from St. Anthony, North Dakota. My husband and I and our 5 children raise registered and commercial Angus cattle in southern Morton County. Our family has a long history in agriculture, and I feel very blessed to be able to pass on the tradition of stewardship of the land and the livestock to the next generation. That tradition is coupled with the use of the latest science and emerging technologies so we can match our management with the needs of our cattle and the landscape for mutual benefits and optimal resiliency. As was mentioned, I'm also the Executive Vice President of the North Dakota Stockmen's Association, a 92-year-old trade organization representing more than 3,100 ranchers. In addition to our membership activities, we also administer our state's brand programs, as well as the EPA Section 319 grant, which gives us a unique perspective on how circumstances, including drought, impacts natural resources, as well as the local economies of rural America. This year, as been described, has been filled with challenges, and certainly historic drought has been on top of the list for North Dakotans and our neighbors in the West. The yellows, oranges, reds, and browns of the drought monitor map tell the story well. Nearly the entire West designated in some level of disaster, and North Dakota is no exception. Currently, 99.8% of our state has some drought designation, and we have set records we never wanted. Among those, the earliest onset of D4 conditions and the highest drought severity and coverage index in our history. Water, of course, is central to our management, and without it, everything changes. Pastures go dry, decreasing the available forage available to graze or to be baled and fed later. And some are rendered entirely unusable because if there's no water for the livestock to drink, even the forage that's there cannot be tapped and used. In fact, water development was the prevailing task at the Ellingson Ranch this summer as we worked to combat the drought. Our crew back home installed 5 new miles of pipeline, implemented 13 new water tanks, as well as renovated an abandoned well to help respond to the water demands of our herd. Changes to grazing has extended to public lands as well. In North Dakota, livestock producers work with the Forest Service and the Bureau of Land Management to manage about 1.7 million acres. And I know that doesn't seem like a lot to many of you on the committee, as you have larger federal land expanses in your home state. But those acres are significant not only to our state's cattle industry, but our state's ecology. Whether on private land or public land grazing allotments, North Dakota ranchers have had to make hard decisions in order to reduce numbers, to prevent overgrazing, and encourage regrowth of native grasses. Because the Stockmen's Association administers the brand inspection programs, I've had a chance to see these decisions play out in real time. Many have reduced their herd sizes because the forage simply isn't there. We've seen a 24% increase in sales at auction markets this year, with North Dakota ranchers selling 148,000 cows as of July. The average for an entire year is 200,000. It's a painstaking decision for families because those cows are not only the foundation of the herd, but represent generations of selection and improvement that cannot be replicated overnight. Of course, drought causes other threats too. Fire, perhaps the most widespread and destructive. As of Monday, fires have burned nearly 6 million acres across the nation and about 125,000 across North Dakota, nearly double that of last year. Together, fire and drought impact our livestock and our ability to steward the land. Ranchers and the livestock grazing we manage prioritize retention of native grasses that are great forage for our livestock, but also critical in feeding wildlife, providing habitat, and storing carbon at a vast scale. Ruminant grazing increases grassland's potential to store carbon in complex root systems, making these ecosystems more resilient to all threats, including drought. As this committee, this Congress, and this administration looks to ways to make landscapes more resilient and to increase conservation, using grazing to manage grasslands and optimize their potential will be key. Cattle producers are grateful for the assistance we've received to respond to emergency conditions. And a special thanks goes out to Senator Hoeven for your work to provide additional allowances in the Emergency Livestock Assistance Program to offset the cost of transportation of feed. As we move forward, hoping, praying for rain, I encourage this committee and the administration to think about how we can prevent the need to examine response to a drought. That is, how do we make landscapes more resilient to drought? As a rancher, I know that landscapes carefully managed through livestock grazing are more resilient. Healthy ecosystems must be created, nurtured, and maintained, and it takes coordination with all parties. Healthy landscapes take investment from each of us, and ranchers are already doing their part. Thank you for the opportunity to testify, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Ellingson, and thank you again to all of our witnesses for their testimony. We're now going to open up the hearing to questions from members. Members will be recognized for 5 minutes each. I'm going to start with a few questions and then be followed by Ranking Member Hyde-Smith. So starting with, this first question's primarily for Ms. Trujillo. I'll have a follow-up for Mr. Bushatsky and Ms. Pitt. But Ms. Trujillo, I want to focus on infrastructure because Congress needs to think bigger than programs that fund short-term drought relief. We need to upgrade assets and deploy technology to adapt to climate change over the long term. And more can be done to improve the water efficiency of our dams and irrigation canals in the West. These systems are often over 50 years old and they leak a lot of water. The bipartisan infrastructure bill that passed the Senate in August provides $8.3 billion to repair our aging Western water infrastructure, deploy water recycling and desalination technology, invest in watershed health, and enhance surface and groundwater storage. And I'm proud to be part of the core group of senators, Democrats and Republicans, who secured this funding. So, Ms. Trujillo, how will Interior use this infrastructure funding to improve the situation at Lake Mead and Lake Powell?
Thank you, Senator. Again, your leadership is very much appreciated on these issues, and I was happy to testify in support of that legislation here in the committee. We will utilize the authorities and the funding that will be received to continue to build upon the good collaborative success that we have had in the Colorado River Basin. I want to reiterate what my colleagues have said earlier is we have a crisis. It is a very serious situation, and we are working together to innovate and utilize the authorities that we get from Congress and the funding that we get to help build upon those programs. We have additional conservation programs in the lower basin that are going to be available for us to help with respect to those reservoir levels. And in the upper basin, we'll continue to work closely with the partners there as well. So appreciate the opportunity to build upon the success and look forward to working with you as that moves forward.
Could you give a specific example of an infrastructure project that could improve the situation in Lake Mead and Lake Powell?
Absolutely. One of them is connected with our bipartisan process, the binational process and development of additional capabilities at the Minute 323 and the 242 well field actually in Arizona, and will help make the system more efficient and allow us to retain more of the surface water storage that's available. That's a good example of that capability.
And by capturing water in other places, we can keep more in Lake Mead and Lake Powell.
Absolutely, and the expanded authorities that we have in the water recycling category as well will do exactly the same thing.
Mr. Bushatsky, same question for you. How will this funding, can you think of some examples how this is going to help Arizona and the West?
Yes, Chairman Kelly. Yes, Chairman Kelly. In Yuma, Arizona, the area that Jennifer Pitt referred to in her remarks about lettuce in the wintertime, there's infrastructure improvements that can make sure that over-deliveries in the lower part of the river do not occur, that water will not go to waste if those infrastructure improvements are made. We also are looking again at paying for conservation with willing partners, and I think some of the funding could be available for that. It's not necessarily infrastructure, but it will result in more water in Lake Mead and leveraging money that the state has made available to me for that purpose within our state. We are working with the Southern Nevada Water Authority, the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California, the Central Arizona Project, on a potential recycling project in Southern California that would allow that recycled water to be used in Southern California instead of being discharged into the ocean in a way that the other partners could share in some of the benefits of that water in their state. So those are just a couple of the examples. Infrastructure funding and the funding available in that bill are critical. We're looking at in-state brackish groundwater desalination, looking at doing ocean desalination in the Sea of Cortez with Mexico under Minute 323. So there's no end to the list of potential projects that could benefit Arizona, the lower basin, and Lake Mead.
Thank you, Mr. Bushatsky. I'll now recognize Senator Hoeven for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't want to get ahead of the ranking member. All right.
Sorry. No.
I would defer to the
recognize-
ranking member.
Yes, let's do that.
Either way. My first question is going to be for Ms. Ellingson. What sort of impacts are you currently seeing from the drought on farmers, ranchers, and rural communities, and how it's impacting them compared to years past?
Thank you, Ranking Member Height-Smith. Significant impacts. As I described, this has really been a historic drought, and so livestock producers have been faced with some tough decisions in order to respond to that. Decisions like severely culling their herd, in some extreme cases, liquidating their herd, also sending animals far distance away to be fed, or sourcing expensive feed, again, which is hard to come by and expensive to haul. Those are significant decisions. And of course, the agricultural is the foundation of our state's economy. And so not only do they have impacts to the livestock industry, that also has impacts to Main Street and our overall state economy. And so serious issues that they're impacting as we work through the conditions at hand.
Okay, and in terms of mitigating drought-related stress on farms and ranchers, which programs and contracts that are offered through USDA's Natural Resources Conservation do you and people in your position, the folks in the cattle producing industry, which one of those programs do you rely on the most?
There's a whole array of programs, of course, that livestock producers benefit from. The first that comes to mind would be the EQIP program through the Natural Resource Conservation Program. Certainly, there's opportunities for cost share to employ best management practices, whether it's rotational grazing, water development, and such. But that certainly is an important one. Similarly, we have some state programs that have helped support producers' efforts to put some of those same types of practices on the ground, and again, helping long-term mitigation of drought and other challenges.
And what potential consequences would your industry face if any of those projects were delayed or backlogged or slowed down greatly?
There would be significant challenges. Again, those are our opportunities to not only deal with the right now, but the long-term sustainability of our operations. And of course, the sustainability of livestock grazing has implications for wildlife and for the storage of carbon in other areas. And so those programs are very meaningful, and we encourage the continued support of them.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. And now that we got the order figured out, Senator Hoeven.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it very much. Julie, you talked about the impacts of the drought this year. Talk a little bit about the impacts if this becomes a multi-year drought.
Yes, so while we hope and pray that that isn't the case, we're prepared for it with the seriousness of that. Of course, this year, our producers haven't had the significant drought last year, like many within the committee here, but there were pockets, of course, last year within our state as well. But this year, producers are relying on the reserves that they have in their hay pile. Again, having a head start because of that storage. However, as we burn through those resources, and those resources are incredibly scarce, as our neighbors across the West also are buying for the same ones, it'll become even more serious. It's a long term to replenish the rangeland and to get back to normal, if you will. And so that's very much top of mind, and that also is indicating some of the decisions that producers are faced with right now, downsizing their herd, and again, sourcing livestock feed and sources of livestock feed for their herds.
Right, and that's particularly true for as we work to get our younger ranchers into business and have gotten some in business. This is a particular challenge for them, isn't it, and keeping them going?
Absolutely. There's nothing that livestock producers want more than to be able to pass their operations on to the next generation. And so the daily decisions, whether it's natural resources and attention to the natural resources in our care, or ushering in the next generation to carry on that tradition is so vitally important. And so concerned about those young producers, again, picking up the baton and doing the good things on the land. And so top of mind for us as well.
Yeah, you also mentioned the grazing on public lands in North Dakota and other places in the West, and the important role that those allotments play. Are there steps that the administration should take to provide more flexibility to ranchers looking for additional sources of forage?
Yes, that certainly would be helpful. And as I indicated, those public lands are certainly significant to our livestock industry. And so continued communication and coordination with the producers that are grazing on those allotments is critical. Certainly they have the importance of caring for those lands is just like if it is their own private land and the significance to their operations. Whether it's having that open dialogue, viewing the livestock grazing as a critical component to sustaining those landscapes, as well as addressing issues like the overstocking of wild horse and burros, dealing with fire mitigation, all important to the long-term sustainability of those allotments and in dealing with the drought at hand.
Yeah, and the ranking member actually asked one of the questions I was going to ask in terms of some of these other programs that can be helpful. And one of the programs, of course, is ELAP, Emergency Livestock Assistance Program, which we now have to help with the transportation cost of water as well as the transportation cost of feed. But pairing that up with livestock forage program and others, that's something we have to have on a long-term basis, right? Not just on a one-year deal for drought.
Absolutely. The enhancements that were added to the emergency livestock assistance programs to offset the cost of transportation is significant, meaningful to every livestock producer in North Dakota this year. And so we're appreciative of that additional support, along with other support programs like the livestock forage program, also under the USDA emergency umbrella, are significant to our producers, and keeping them maintained in a permanent status is important because that helps livestock producers plan and make the best decisions under serious conditions.
Right, thank you. And then Secretary Trujillo, in North Dakota, as far as moving water east from the Missouri River, we've got the Red River Valley Water Supply Project, and we've got the NDOS alternate supply, and NDOS stands for Eastern North Dakota Alternate Water Supply Project. And in January, we got the Bureau of Rec completed its final EIS, Environmental Impact Statement, signed a record of decision on NDOS. Given the extreme drought in our state, will you support the reclamation's work to bring the Red River Valley Water Supply Project, in particular NDOS, alternate water supply, online? Work with us to do that.
Thank you, Senator. Absolutely, yes. That is an important project, and we're supporting it moving forward as quickly as possible. It's a great example of the connection between surface water and groundwater and the need to have backup supplies and be innovative. Again, as others have said, that's what we need to do right now.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. And please come out, and we'll give you the tour, and would love to host you.
Thank you. Be nice.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Ms. Pitt, I want to back up and talk a little bit more about the infrastructure bill, the $8.3 billion to repair our aging western water infrastructure. What does this funding do to help ecosystem health?
Thank you for the question. There are all kinds of infrastructure that agricultural producers rely on, and particularly in the higher elevation reaches of the Colorado River Basin, we have seen some really impressive examples of infrastructure investments that are, for instance, allowing a rancher to put some small low head structures in a creek on their property, and that in turn is holding water on the property longer during the season, extending their water supply, allowing for additional groundwater recharge, improving the health of wetlands, and generally improving ecosystem health. There are other examples. I read about one recently up on the Henry's Fork in southwestern Wyoming, where funding was used to convert a ranch from flood irrigation to sprinklers, and that actually is preventing salt loading in the river, again creating additional resilience for the rancher in that they can extend their water supply longer through the year because they're not using so much with the flood, and it's improving stream health. So I think there are a lot of win-wins with ranchers who are taking good care of the land with additional federal support for infrastructure. can also help improve the ecosystem and ecosystem services that we need to scale up right now in order to improve the health of these watersheds that really are the source of our water supply all the way down the river.
Well, thank you, Ms. Pitt. And Senator Barrasso, if you are ready, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all of our witnesses today. Ms. Ellingson, as you know, drought's a serious issue in my home state of Wyoming, and all, of course, as you mentioned, all across the West. Been particularly hard hit have been our ranchers, our farmers. They're the backbone of our rural communities in Wyoming and the rural economy. So in discussing the drought's impact on ranchers and farmers, there was an article in the Sheridan Press where Linda Benzel of the USDA Farm Service Agency in Sheridan and Johnson counties in Wyoming was quoted as saying this about 2 weeks ago. She said, "This year has been extremely dry. Producers have had a lack of feed, a lack of stock water due to the drought, have seen reservoirs drying up, a shortage of hay, and have had to buy extra hay." She goes on to say, people have been having to haul in extra feed from out of the county and out of state, and some have had to sell down their cattle. There have been people who have had to liquidate some of their herd. She said last year it was dry, but it compounded this year. The drought never let up for 2 years in a row. It's caused hardship for producers. Ms. Ellingson, is this what you are seeing and hearing on the ground back home in North Dakota as well?
Yes, Senator Barrasso, in a word, yes, absolutely. The impacts that you describe are absolutely what our producers are faced with from border to border, north to south and east to west. In fact, the statement that was read from that excerpt really could have been about our state, and I know many others across the country.
Thank you.
As we indicated, we didn't have the serious drought statewide like we did, like you all did last year. But we were unfortunately are making up for a lot of lost time. Same challenges related to sourcing feed, reducing herds that you're experiencing in Wyoming or what we're experiencing now. You know, one example, we have a member from the northeast quadrant of our state who talked about and had the opportunity to hay some CRP ground in the southeast part of our state. Had to make 58 trips in order to bring that hay home, the equivalent of 30,000 miles. Put another way, that is traveling around the world. 25,000 miles is what is the circumference of the Earth. And so significant distances, yes.
No, I appreciate it. And so Ms. Trujillo, so it's clear ranchers and farmers are struggling, not just in one limited location. What do you believe the department can do to prioritize providing more water for our ranching and farming communities out west in the short term and the long term?
Thank you, Senator. We are working very closely with our partner federal agencies such as USDA on exactly these issues. We have within the reclamation program lots of opportunities to expand water supplies, and are working collaboratively with farmers in all of the western states. With respect to the Department of Agriculture programs, we understand they have additional capabilities available, and they will be working to supply those and use them, again, innovatively to be able to meet constituents' needs.
So the Family Farm Alliance, Mr. Hio, has submitted written testimony for the record, and I ask unanimous consent that it be part of the record.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In their written testimony, the Family Farm Alliance states with regard to water storage projects, properly designed and constructed surface storage projects provide additional water management flexibility to better meet downstream urban, industrial, and agriculture water needs, to improve flood control, generate clean hydropower, provide recreation opportunities, and create additional in-stream flows that can benefit downstream fish and wildlife species. Yes or no, do you agree with that statement?
I do, and I was able to see that testimony earlier today, and I really appreciate their partnership. I think working with storage, both underground and above ground, in ways that can help maximize our flexibilities helps us a lot in lots of different contexts.
And as you know, cattle ranching is vital to my state's homes, rural economy. How does the administration intend to ensure that drought doesn't cause interruptions in food production for the country?
Well, that's something that we are working closely with partners as well, and recognize the hardships that many of our farmers and ranchers have endured in this year in particular and in past years, and also try to make sure that we have tools available to meet the emergency needs, but build resilience. And those are the types of programs that we're looking forward to in the infrastructure context and our other programs as well.
A final question, are there things that we could have done, say, 10 years ago that would put us in a better place today to manage the drought, and, building more storage? Would that have been helpful to capture and store water during the wet years?
It probably depends on a place-by-place basis to answer the question. In some places, we have available storage that we've been able to utilize. In some places, we see continued challenges in our infrastructure that we know we need to continue to improve upon. The aging infrastructure issue is an important priority for us. Building additional capabilities is something we want to work on.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Mr. Bushotsky, I think it was last year, the snowpack in the Rockies was about 90%, close to 90% of normal, but the runoff into the river was in the 25 or 30% or so, which is rather concerning. And if we see this continue, basin states will face a second round of water curtailments. We originally planned for this to happen around 2026, but new data suggests that we need to prepare for this much sooner than we anticipated. So, Mr. Bushotsky, what are the 7 states doing now to prepare for this? If you could outline that for us.
So, Senator Kelly, that outcome that you described in terms of relatively average snowpack but very small runoff is something of huge concern to us moving forward. The 7 basin states have been meeting since about June and have a series of meetings scheduled between now and the end of the year. One of the things that we are talking about is what do we expect the future flow of the river to be? We've seen reductions of flow over the last 20 and 30 years, and we need to come to some level of understanding and planning about what we can count on into the future, and then ratchet down our action items and our water use to match what we think the river is going to be. Within the lower basin, again, I mentioned the consultation provision for the drought contingency plan. We have also been meeting to find ways to protect elevation 1020 in Lake Mead. Again, talking about additional conservation efforts and perhaps additional cuts, if it comes to that, to help protect the declining levels of Lake Mead. So I think we will continue to work on that between now and the end of the year, try to put a program in place hopefully by the end of the year or get as far as we can. The longer we wait to take those actions for Lake Powell and Lake Mead, the more you have to conserve or the more you have to cut to achieve the same desired result out into the future.
And for folks who are watching this, it might be, if you don't understand the science behind this, maybe you can talk a little bit about that. How do we wind up with 90% or so of snowpack and only 25 or 30% of the normal amount of water into the river?
So, Senator Kelly, we believe that is a prime example of what climate change is doing. It is hotter, it is drier, and the snow either sublimates or does not run off into the river, it soaks into the ground. In the prior year, the summer precipitation, in which at least Arizona we call it the monsoon, was a non-soon. We had very little precipitation, so the watershed was very dry, the soil was very dry, and a lot of the water just soaked into the ground. We've also seen the snow melting earlier in time. We've also seen vegetation growing sooner, which of course then uses more of the water as well. So those are kind of the elements that all connect to that outcome that you described. And we've not just seen it last year, we've seen it in prior years as well.
Thank you. And Ms. Trujillo, are you confident an interstate agreement will be reached, and is Reclamation participating in this?
Thank you, Senator. As I mentioned earlier, we have a proven track record of developing interstate agreements in the Colorado River Basin. I am confident we will continue that track record, and Reclamation is absolutely in the middle of all of the ongoing discussions. I want to compliment the work of my colleague Tom Bushotsky and others that have been rolling up their sleeves and really trying to be out in front of the future conditions that we may be seeing.
And Mr. Bushatsky, how confident are you that another drought contingency agreement is going to be reached?
So Senator, failure is not an option. 40 million people and millions of acres of farmland rely on this. We faced this with the drought contingency plan in 2018 and 2019. We had hard choices to make, but we got there. We will get there again. I believe Arizona and the other states do not want an outcome in which perhaps the Secretary might dictate winners and losers, and we certainly do not want to be in a courtroom in which a judge dictates winners and losers. So those are several motivations, but we will get there eventually, although it will not be easy. And I also want to compliment Assistant Secretary Trujillo for the help that Reclamation has provided and is helping provide to us in that regard. It's absolutely essential. And again, as I mentioned earlier, the data and the modeling project, the modeling outcomes that they're projecting for us are critical to those discussions. So we will get there, and because we have to, we don't have a choice.
Thank you. I'll now recognize Senator Lee for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The impact of the drought on my home state of Utah has been quite severe, really severe, in fact. The U.S. Drought Monitor shows that 100% of my state is in severe, extreme, or exceptional drought, and it has been, unfortunately, for some time. We all know that drought has different impacts on different areas and even different people within different areas. Along the highly developed Wasatch Front region of my state, it may mean that you take steps to conserve water, perhaps with your lawn or otherwise. Well, we appreciate those efforts, and we're thankful to people for doing their part in wherever they live. But for other people, like farmers and ranchers, the impacts of drought can be much more direct and severe. Many grazing allotments in Utah have been cut by 20% in capacity, and the forage just isn't there for the cattle and the sheep to graze on. We're seeing this problem. In fact, in some Utah counties, hay production is down to just 20%. Some producers are ordering feed from faraway places, places as far away as Nebraska. Ordinarily, that's not something they have to do in this part of the country. Rivers that normally provide water to our producers are down to a trickle, forcing us to ration. Throughout the summer months, producers were forced to cull anywhere from 1,000 to 1,500 head a week. Again, that's 1,000 to 1,500 animals a week that were killed and thereby wasted just as a result of the drought. States need a change so that they can more readily address the drought issues that they face, like those that Utah faces in particular. Everywhere I go in my state, I hear of the need for increased water storage infrastructure. Unfortunately, bureaucratic federal processes often stand in the way of safe, effective, responsible drought mitigation efforts. Ms. Trujillo, can you tell me how many water storage infrastructure projects are currently undergoing NEPA evaluation by your department?
Thank you, Senator Lee. I don't know offhand, but I wanted to acknowledge that I have the pleasure of working very closely with the CUPCA office and their construction efforts, and the storage elements that that project provides are beneficial to Utah, especially during these drought issues.
Thank you. I assume you do have access to that information about the number of water storage infrastructure projects that are currently undergoing NEPA analysis.
I can work with our folks at Reclamation and try to get that back to you as soon as possible.
Thank you. If you could get that to us in the next week, that would be very helpful. And can you tell me roughly the average amount of time that's required to complete an EIS for water infrastructure projects?
I don't know that off the top of my head, but we can look into that. I know, there are several storage projects, for example, in California that we're working on, and other areas that are important to maintain that.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate your willingness to get that information for me. In our committee markup of the Energy Infrastructure Act back in July, just a couple months ago, I introduced an amendment modeled off of an existing program, one that's facilitated by the Department of Transportation. That's called the Surface Transportation Project Delivery Program. This is a program for which all states are eligible, that allows the Secretary of Transportation to assign and for the state voluntarily to assume the Secretary's responsibilities for NEPA for one or more highway projects as states feel that they can handle. Mr. Bashaki, both Utah and Arizona participate in that voluntary program in the transportation context. Now, constituents in my state have told me that this program has greatly expedited the rate at which they can start work on certain critical transportation infrastructure projects that the state in question chooses to prioritize. They appreciate being able to take up these projects on a case-by-case basis. Do you think that such a program could be helpful in developing water infrastructure projects in your state and curbing the effects of the West's prolonged and devastating drought?
So, Senator Lee, I'm not hugely familiar with that program in Arizona, but I know the Department of Administration or the Department of Transportation, is using that program. And I know that often when there's categorical exclusion, NEPA, it works really well. I do know that in my experience with these NEPA projects, the proponents are looking for a reduction in the time, a reduction in transactional costs, but also looking for robust processes that can stand the test for litigation. So I think there's a balance there in terms of how that program could work on the infrastructure side. And I think there's an outcome in which we can get to a place where we still have the necessary robust NEPA process and get to a point where infrastructure projects can be accelerated while still protecting the environment and going through all of the NEPA elements that need to be looked at in that process.
Thank you. Thank you. I see my time's expired. I'll note, just to reiterate what you said, I've got a list here of a number of categorical exclusions that we've seen in Arizona on this. It appears to have gone well, and it's preserved the environmental interests at stake, and doing so in a way that helps things move forward. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. I'll now recognize Senator Hyde-Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Trujillo, during your confirmation hearing earlier this year, you were asked for your views on how to strike a balance between environmental, economic views and impacts. You responded by saying you're committed to trying to work with Congress and stakeholders and tribes, farmers, cities to find that said balance. Economically, farmers, ranchers, and rural communities are, as you well know, extremely important, not just for my state, but for the entire nation. What is being done at the federal level to ensure that maintenance backlogs within BOR are being addressed?
Thank you, Senator. I think a lot of the discussion today has touched on the importance of maintaining our programs that help support the farming and ranching communities around the West. I think also talking about the need for improved infrastructure and the need for continued innovation and water recycling type programs, but our maintenance and operation issues are a priority. That does tie carefully with respect, for example, to our dam safety programs, and that may be what you're referring to, but I think we are trying to make sure that we can continue to provide efficient and reliable water supplies to all of the communities that benefit from our programs.
Okay, and I'd like to discuss the Water Smart initiative, which both the Bureau of Reclamation and USDA are familiar with. And this federal program works cooperatively with states, tribes, and local entities to prioritize water supply and modernize existing infrastructure to help resolve rural communities' water conflicts. As of September the 2nd of this year, Reclamation has selected 227 projects across the West to be funded with $73.2 million in Water Smart funding across the western states. Given this large investment to update water storage infrastructure to combat widespread drought, What are you doing to prioritize this program in order to ensure that these rural communities have vital access to more water?
Thank you, Senator, for acknowledging that the Water Smart program is a very effective and popular program within our reclamation portfolio. Congress authorized some of the elements of that program over 10 years ago, and it has been something that we've continued to build upon in our annual budgeting process and in continuing to think through how to best evaluate the requests that we come in for expanded capabilities there. It is something that we will continue to do so in that regard. It's a good program, and we appreciate congressional support for it.
Great, thank you.
And just to follow up on the Senator's question about Water Smart program, Ms. Pick, can you provide some examples of how these grants could be used for climate resilience in the Colorado River Basin?
Thank you. Community resilience to climate change can be improved with investments in nature-based solutions with water smart investments that help farmers and ranchers make improvements on their properties in particular that can help them extend their water supply as well as improve the health of their properties. And I think the examples that I gave earlier with respect to low-head structures and streams, as well as sprinkler pivot irrigation systems replacing flood, are two good examples of how water smart investments can, at scale, really help us with water supply and ecosystem health.
Thank you. I want to pivot here for a second to something I look at nearly every single week. I'll take a look and see at the levels of water in Lake Mead especially, but also Lake Powell. So this is for Ms. Trujillo and Mr. Bushatsky. I want to talk about these latest predictions for those two reservoirs, Mead and Powell. In August, the Bureau of Reclamation issued a 2-year projection that water levels at the Hoover Dam would remain below 1,075 feet above sea level, and that triggers Tier 1 of the Drought Contingency Plan, the water cutbacks for Arizona and Nevada. Lake Powell would also lose water but remain above the minimum power pool level, and that's the elevation level where the Glen Canyon Dam would have to pause its hydropower operations. In September, though, Reclamation issued a new 5-year projection that painted a bleaker picture. Lake Powell could approach dead pool by 2022, and Lake Mead's probability of entering Tier 2 cutbacks by 2023 increased. And I think everybody benefits from using the best available science. I'm a big believer in that because we need to know what we're up against here. So, Mr. Trujillo, could you walk us through why these projections changed from what we saw before September to what we saw with the 5-year projection?
Absolutely, Senator, thank you. And part of the answer involves the continued desire for us to evolve and utilize the best available science and make sure that we can communicate effectively with a variety of people who are watching this information. The reclamation folks produce on a monthly basis the 24-month study analysis, and then on a regular basis the 5-year projections. We have been doing that for several years, but we're continuing to try to improve upon the capabilities in those reports. The most recent changes have involved a clarification of the time frame that we're using to feed into them. So instead of using a 100-year record, we have focused more specifically on a 30-year record because that accurately projects what we anticipate we will be seeing in the future. We have done that previously, but we've been focusing on it in this most recent projection. An additional change involved an assumption that relates to upper basin additional releases into Lake Powell, and we are not continuing that assumption because we're not sure what the projected drought response actions are going to be. So we want to be safe and conservative about what we're doing there. So those are two examples of how we've changed from a month-to-month basis, but we're working very collaboratively with the other folks in the basin on how to do that.
And the switch from the 100-year data set to the 30-year, was it because historically, as you are trying to do these projections, the 30-year data set was just turning out to be more accurate in making future predictions?
That's absolutely correct. We have, in the 100-year projections, that included some of the very, very wet years that we're not anticipating to see going forward. And so that was making the results skewed in that regard. And again, we had been doing both of the analysis for some time, but are now focusing on the shorter term range and think that's more accurate going forward.
Well, thank you. I'm going to come back to this in about 5 minutes. I want to recognize Senator Hyde-Smith again for 5 minutes. Well, let me just transition then to back to Mr. Bushatsky here. What are your views on reclamation's data, and how does it affect state planning?
So, Senator Kelly, I welcome the more conservative approach that reclamation is decided to use. For probably at least 6 years that I'm aware of, we've looked at removing the historical record prior to 1931, and that historic or that hydrologic record then matches very closely with the 30-year record that now reclamation's using. In the drought contingency plan, we looked at that same kind of 30-year period in terms of bending the probability curve to better protect Lake Powell and Lake Mead. So it's not something that's brand new, but again, I welcome this more conservative approach. I think it's incumbent upon us as water managers to use that more conservative approach and plan for the drier years rather than the wetter years. I'll also say that we have that approach has raised the bar again for the necessary conservation action items that we need to take to protect Lake Mead and Lake Powell. And if it's wetter than this more conservative approach, I'll do my happy dance, which I don't think anyone wants to see. But we will plan for that drier future within our state, and using those more conservative projections gives us more leeway to deal with the future.
Let's hope at some point we get to see that dance. But I want to commend you and all Arizona stakeholders for developing a state-specific drought mitigation plan that will see us through these initial drought curtailments in our state. And even though we are about to lose 18% of our Colorado River water allocation, remarkably, most Arizonans are not going to notice this. It's going to be transparent to them. But one important, very important community that is going to feel the pain of this, that is the farmers in central Arizona. And many of these farms grow cotton, others grow cattle feed for our local dairy farms, which are top agricultural products in our state. So, Mr. Bushatsky, what can be done right now and into next year to help our central Arizona farmers?
So, Senator Kelly, our central Arizona farmers maintain the right to pump groundwater that they received in the 1980 Groundwater Code with, of course, efficiency and conservation requirements. The state has made $40 million available to those farmers for an infrastructure and efficiency program that will help them. Water users with higher priority water, like cities, tribes, and industrial users, are sending some of their water to those farmers in return for eventually getting a credit back for the use of that water by the farmers. So we've put together a very robust mitigation plan honoring the priority system within our state for water rights. Yet despite that factor, projections in 2018 and 19 were that they'd still have to fallow 30 to 40% of their land. I haven't been able to get an updated number since then. However, the other option that they are also pursuing is through the Department of Agricultural Regional Conservation Partnership Program. They have an application in those irrigation districts to the federal government also for some financial help, again, for infrastructure and efficiency improvements. So we're doing the best we can to help somewhat mitigate those water users, but we cannot fully mitigate the losses of water that occur to them because of the water right priority system that we are honoring within our state.
When they fallow the land, there are, and you mentioned some, but are there, is there any sort of guarantee that they are going to be compensated for doing that?
So again, the compensation that we are providing to them is really about them being able to more effectively and efficiently move their water and use their water so that the fallowing of the land is less than what it otherwise would be without that program. So straight up mitigation for just the fallowing is not really available to them, but we hope that they can largely stay in business through this mitigation program and moving into the future, which is going to be very different for them moving forward. They're not going to be able to farm the way they have farmed historically, and it's a real paradigm shift through the agricultural community within the Central Arizona Project in Central and Southern Arizona.
Well, let's continue to work together to make sure we have the best possible outcome here. And Mr. Hio, a follow-up question for you on this. Can Interior and maybe the Department of Agriculture do more to support these Central Arizona farmers?
Thank you, Senator. We look forward to working with you and the partners in Arizona on exactly that. The programs that we have available are designed to help farmers and ranchers in those types of situations. And again, look forward to working with USDA on trying to make sure we can meet the most needs as possible.
Thank you. And Ms. Pitt, I understand that you've also spent years in Arizona working on these Colorado River issues. So thank you again for being here today. And Audubon is part of a coalition of conservation organizations that have led to efforts to restore and maintain endangered species along the Colorado River and to maintain their habitats. Partnerships with farmers, state and local governments, and other water users are key to making this all work. I would add tribal governments are important players too because they hold substantial water rights in the West. Are there tribes in the lower basin who are eager to do more to help, and what can Congress do to empower them?
Thank you for the question, Senator Kelly. Indeed, tribes in Arizona on a number of occasions have agreed to conserve water in order to help Arizona's water users absorb shortages, both by creating system water and sometimes by transferring their conserved water to other users. However, there are some tribes, including the Colorado River Indian tribes and others, who are limited by restrictions of their water off reservation. They're not allowed to transfer that water off reservation. So Congress could extend the benefits of tribal water conservation and allow those tribes to engage in transfers with water users who are experiencing shortages, as well as transfers that could supply water for the environment. And as a matter of equity, ensuring that tribes are able to lease water off their reservation seems only fair, given that other Colorado River water users in Arizona enjoy this right.
And if they, as they transfer water off of their tribal land and lease the water, so they're compensated financially for this leasing, what does that compel them to do?
Well, they have to start, I guess, by conserving some water on their lands, and then with that conserved consumptive use, they are able, if Congress could pass, could enable off-reservation transfers, then their conserved consumptive use could be transferred to other water users. But at present, at least for Colorado River Indian tribes and some others in the state, they are not able to do that at this time, notwithstanding the fact that they have some of the largest water rights in the state of Arizona.
So there's significant motivation then towards conservation.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Before we close here, I just want to take an opportunity to, for Mr. Bushatsky and Ms. Trujillo here to, thinking ahead and thinking outside of the box. We mentioned desalinization earlier. I'd like to hear from either of you what something like that would look like, maybe in the Sea of Cortez. How much water do you think that could possibly create? Just any other details you have on that, but also on any other, large-scale, possible solutions. I, again, want to reiterate, we are the most creative country in the world. We are really good at solving hard problems, especially engineering problems. I come, from a background in engineering. I know we can solve this. In Arizona and the lower basin states, we've got a bright future. Arizona has the largest or the fastest growing county in the country, Maricopa County. Businesses come to Arizona. They should continue to come because we're going to fix this issue. But I'd like to hear from you just a little bit about what you, as you think about this and you start to think outside the box, what comes to mind?
I think both of us are looking forward to answering the question. I'll kick off with a few responses. I think the themes from this whole hearing have involved the need to be innovative and flexible, and that's what we're going to absolutely have to do in the Colorado River Basin. But we've also emphasized the need to be collaborative and to work together on these issues. I think you raised the topic of trying to use technology, trying to be creative, trying to have that underlying basis in science, and that's what we're committed to do at Reclamation and USGS and the Interior Department. It's going to be no doubt about it that we're going to be part of those conversations and look forward to trying to have those resources available to our communities. Our partners in Arizona are available and going to be working with us specifically on those issues.
Mr. Brushatsky?
Well, Senator Kelly, I guess I'll focus on the binational desalination in the Sea of Cortez, partly because I am actually the United States co-chair for the United States delegation. With the appointment recently of the U.S. International Boundary and Water Commission commissioner and a new commissioner on the Mexico side, I think we can move forward again on that process. In June of 2020, you can see on the International Boundary and Water Commission website, and we can provide you with that report. The first phase report looking at 3 opportunities in the Sea of Cortez for binational desalination plants. They are relatively cost effective, using a mechanism to transfer water or exchange water with Mexico and deliver that water down, the desal water down in the Yuma area. We have several issues to work through over the years with Mexico, and then if we decide collectively to move forward with the project, another minute to the treaty, the Mexican Water Treaty needs to be negotiated. So we're probably 8 to 10 years out in the normal course of business with actually having a plant, but it's economically feasible. We can get the water to where it's needed. It can create great benefits, not only for Arizona, but for Nevada and California who are participating, and of course for Mexico. So I have great optimism that we will achieve that end over time. And I think the commitment of the Department of Interior through the Bureau of Reclamation to that process and to the State Department through the International Boundary and Water Commission is critical to success moving forward with Mexico.
Well, thank you. And I want to thank my colleagues today, especially my ranking member, Senator Hyde-Smith, and today's witnesses for participating in today's hearing. Thank you very much for being here. Before we conclude, though, I want to request unanimous consent to add statements to the record from the Yuma County Agriculture Water Coalition, the Colorado River Energy Distributors Association, the Arizona Farm Bureau, and the Family Farm Alliance. So ordered. The subcommittee has a 48-hour deadline for members to submit written questions to our witnesses, so you may see some more questions. The hearing record will remain open for 2 weeks. Thank you again, especially to our witnesses, and the subcommittee stands adjourned.